The civil rights movement took place around the 1950s and 1960s. This time period was marked by racial segregation in the community and prejudices against African Americans. Everything, including schools, restaurants, bus seats, bathrooms, and even drinking fountains, were segregated into white and colored. A landmark case for the movement was the Supreme Court case of Brown versus the Board of Education in 1954. Linda Brown was denied admission to her elementary school in Topeka, Kansas, because she was black. A lawsuit was filed against the Board of Education. Her suit eventually reached the Supreme Court under Chief Justice Earl Warren. Attorney Thurgood Marshall of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People argued that the segregation among schools was not giving equal opportunities to the minorities. Warren ruled that separate educational facilities are inherently unequal and is therefore unconstitutional. From that point on, the schools of Topeka, Kansas were desegregated, much to the dismay of the white majority. This court decision became the first step towards African American civil rights. In Montgomery, Alabama, on December 1, 1955, the monumental bus boycott was ignited by Rosa Parks when she refused to move to the back of the bus to give up her seat to a white man. She, along with Martin Luther King Jr., led the boycott. It lasted for more than a year until the buses were desegregated on December 21, 1956. Many nonviolent protests popped up around this time, such as the Greensboro sit-in. In February of 1960, 4 African American students from North Carolina Agricultural and Technical College sat at a segregated Woolworth's lunch counter. Even though they were refused service, they were allowed to sit at the counter. This triggered many similar student sit-ins throughout the South and was very effective. 6 months later, the 4 students were served lunch at the same Woolworth's counter. This method of protest was used to desegregate other public places, such as swimming pools, public parks, libraries, and theaters. As time passed, tensions grew. Public protests were becoming more frequent. The police started arresting and jailing protesters. Eventually, violence arose. Policemen used fire hoses and police dogs to suppress protests. Martin Luther King Jr., influenced by Mohandas Gandhi's methods of nonviolent protest, led the March on Washington on August 28, 1963. He and 250,000 supporters marched from the Washington Monument to the Lincoln Memorial, where King gave his famous "I Have a Dream" speech.
Will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today.
The march and his speech were broadcast on national and international television. Literally hundreds of cameramen were used to cover the event. Television stations around the world, from ABC to BBC, gave some of their own commentaries on the event to give their local audiences a thorough understanding of it. Finally, on July 2, 1964, Lyndon B. Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act, the most sweeping civil rights legislation since Reconstruction. The act made racial discrimination illegal. Public places, such as libraries and parks, were desegregated. Schools and employers were forced to give equal opportunities to everyone, regardless of skin color. Unfortunately, not everyone was happy about the integration of blacks and whites in society. On June 21, 1964, 3 civil rights workers, James Chaney, Andrew Goodman, and Michael Schwerner, who had been working to register black voters in Mississippi, were murdered. Policemen had arrested them for speeding, kept them imprisoned for hours, and then released them after dark for the Ku Klux Klan to kill. It was later proven that a conspiracy existed between the county's law enforcement and the Ku Klux Klan. It is clear that even with the success of the civil rights movement and the signing of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, we still do have social inequalities and injustices, even to this day. Despite the existence of such groups like the KKK, The civil rights movement did have a profound impact on the attitudes of the rest of the world regarding civil rights. It served as a model for the support and advancement of other minority groups, such as women, disabled, homosexuals, and many others. Awareness for these minorities brought about the establishment of organizations advocating their rights. Examples of these groups include the Beijing Platform for Action, the Optional Protocol to the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, the Black Power movement, and the advancement in gender equality. Today, civil rights are granted to all American citizens. Voting rights are not affected by race or gender, and public discrimination is less prevalent. The civil rights movement has opened the door to new possibilities.